Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Stewarts Soundbites. It is June already. I don't know how we got here. It's nearly the summer holidays, that dreaded period of 6 weeks where you have to sort yourself out and get everything sorted. So I hope everyone's okay. So today we are really lucky because we've got Rachel Burley-Stower, who actually you've been on Soundbites twice before, Rachel, which is a testament to how useful and engaging your previous sessions were. Those sessions are still online and can still be watched and accessed. So I'd encourage anyone to go and have a look at them. We covered NHS CHC before. We covered local authority funding in a bit of detail. And I have used those webinars since to refresh memory and to provide other people with information because they're so useful. So I would encourage everyone to go and listen to them. But as most of you will know, tuning in, Rachel is a hugely experienced community care law solicitor from Martin Searle, and she's agreed, twisted her arm to come back again because we were chatting recently and a couple of really interesting points came up in the discussion, and I thought it would be a really good kind of soundbite for us. So thank you so much for coming, Rachel. We're talking today about the kind of challenges of securing and maintaining local authority funding for care. And I suppose today, and we'll get into this in more detail, but with specific reference to claimants, to people that have had personal injury litigation and have settled claims or are going through that process, and where some of the problems lie, particularly claimants who don't recover 100% of their compensation for various reasons. So what I thought would be useful to start, Rachel, this is also a selfish request to refresh my own memory, is to talk a little bit about local authority funding generally, just a bit of a summary to that. And I suppose without going into all, I mean, you could spend all day talking about it, couldn't you? But just a brief kind of overview, I suppose, of why people are accessing local authority funding as opposed to NHS CHC. And this is maybe a trite point, but just by way of kind of an overview would be so helpful.
Right, so where should I start? Okay, so the reason why I thought it was a good idea actually to come and have this conversation with you today is because I've recently been instructed by a number of professional deputies who are all facing a similar situation. Okay, so they have clients, they're looking after people with catastrophic injuries, with PI settlements, who have had NHS continuing healthcare. And at the beginning, their needs have settled down. The ICB have reviewed that and determined they no longer have a primary healthcare need. And therefore, the deputy has approached the local authority for assistance. And the local authority have taken a very creative approach to the charging regulations and determined that these people are not eligible for local authority funded care. So in answer to your direct question, what is local authority funded care? So local authority funded care, as opposed to NHS CHC, is means tested. So both funding streams pay for care. Both could be provided in the home or in a residential care placement. Both are determined by the level of the person's care needs and assessed against the list of care needs. But the big difference is that local authority funded care is means tested. Okay, so the means test is very, very simply is if a person has more than £23,250 in capital, then they're not eligible. Okay, that's a very, very, very simple and very crude way of describing that.
We did a whole session on it though, Rich. We did a whole session. One of the other episodes is on that.
on that exact point. But as you already know then, Emma, that personal injury settlements in those regulations is disregarded. However, as I say, local authorities are really determined actually to avoid their duties towards people with PI settlements, because what they're saying is that it amounts to double recovery. So if a person has had a compensation claim, and that compensation claim has included an amount for future care. And then that person then approaches the local authority, or the ICB actually for that matter, and asks them to fund the care. What the local authority are saying is that they've been paid twice. So they've had their money for future care, and then they're asking the government to pay for that. And therefore, it's what they basically are calling double recovery. And therefore, they're trying to avoid those payments. And as I say, they're looking very, very closely at the regulations and becoming quite creative in their interpretation. But this is a very, very worrying trend. With that, we haven't got any decisions in relation to any of this yet. None of it's actually reached the courts. There was some early ones that failed, but these are new creations.
And is there consistency, Rachel, across different local authorities, or is it are taking different approaches depending on where people are?
So we've got three different issues running at a moment. One of them I'm not even going to mention because I'm not worried about that one.
Okay.
They're wrong. They're just so legally wrong. So the other two are worrying. I think they've got an argument, and no, it's not every local authority, actually. We've only got a handful of them that I'm seeing. Other people may be seeing these as well, of course. So no, there's not consistency, and there's only at the moment these two arguments that I'm starting that are trickling through, and
Okay.
a number of deputies are really worried, and we are advising and considering what options we can take.
Yeah, for sure. But as you say, although it's not kind of widespread, lots of different local authorities at the minute, it's what you described as a trend, I suppose, which is the kind of key term there, isn't it? So tell me, just expand a wee bit, Rachel, if you don't mind, just a little bit. And I should have said as well, I haven't even checked this with you, Rachel, I hope you don't mind, but if anyone has a question, pop it in the Q&A box and we'll try and address it. So tell me a little bit about the issues that you're seeing that are cropping up, the trends that are emerging, and what that means for people who are trying to either secure or maintain local authority funded care.
Yeah, I'll give you two examples then. So let me take the first one. So Guy, acquired brain injury, lump sum settlement, was in receipt of NHS continuing healthcare. His care needs have settled, his behaviour issues, etc., really settled down. And the ICB carried out its annual review of eligibility and determined he's not eligible. His care package is costing in the region of £200,000 a year. The deputy approached the local authority for a care package. They completed an assessment. They absolutely agree that he is owed a duty in terms of his care needs. He meets the eligibility criteria. So the next stage is to complete the financial assessment. And what they're demanding is full disclosure of all the interest earned on the lump sum. Okay, so we know that the lump sum is disregarded. Okay, so generally speaking, and historically, we've always said that I've always advised people, you're safer with a lump sum settlement, because a lump sum settlement is clearly disregarded within the regulations. Okay, but what they're looking at, instead of looking at the capital regulations, they're looking at the regulations pertaining to the calculation of income. And there is a regulation, which I'm not reading word from word, but I'm going to summarize. So basically what it says is that interest on capital is disregarded, except if the capital itself is disregarded. Okay, so we know that a lump sum is disregarded. And therefore, what they're saying is because the lump sum is disregarded, the interest on the lump sum isn't. Okay, and that is very clear in the regulations. That is exactly what the regulations do actually say. So this is it's difficult. So we are advising the deputies various different courses of action, judicial review, ombudsman, complaint to the ombudsman, and also asking the local authority to exercise its discretion and to disregard under its discretion. But of course, that's only a power, it's not a duty. and therefore we haven't got answers in relation to that yet. We're delving into the intentions of Parliament when the regulations were drafted, which will form part of the arguments for judicial review, but we're not there yet, so we don't actually have an answer. Somebody such as, I don't know, Jamie Burton, I expect, will end up running one of these cases, and then we'll have a decision. But until we actually have a decision, we don't know which way the answer is going to fall. So that's one. The other one is somebody with a spinal cord injury who had a lot of AD in the early days, was found eligible for NHS CHC because the complexity and the unpredictability of AD it was very clear that he was eligible, and has had that in place for a good number of years. Has had a 2-to-1 care package actually with probably costing around about 350,000 a year. And the AD's almost disappeared. He hasn't had an AD for over 2 years. The ICB have reviewed the care package, sorry, not the care package, the eligibility, and determined he's no longer eligible because actually the only thing they were managing is the AD. Now, I know there is arguments actually around that's a well-managed need and that's why he isn't having the AD, and that's a different argument which I'm not going to get into at a moment. But
Yeah.
the deputy has approached the local authority. Now, this guy, he had lump sum and periodic payments. Now, his difficulty is the local authority have followed a rabbit down lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of rabbit holes, because every single regulation refers to yet another regulation, which refers to another regulation, which refers to another set of regulations. And where they end up is the Income Support General Regulations 1987, where on a close reading, it does appear that only £20 per week of a periodic payment ought to be disregarded. And that is what they're relying on. And so again, we're taking an advice on that one, again considering judicial review. It's difficult because clearly the intentions of Parliament at the time of writing was that these personal injury settlements should be disregarded, because it's very clearly in the regulations it says it should be disregarded. But of course the local authorities are all desperate and strapped for cash.
Yeah.
And also running these double recovery points, are fishing around within those regulations to find alternative ways in which these should be their duty to fund these packages can be avoided. And this is where we are at a moment. As I say, no decisions as yet, but somebody's going to run an argument at some point. I mean, the more and more of these local authorities who are running this, more and more deputies are going to come unstuck, and at some point somewhere along the line this needs to be determined by a court. And of course it depends on which way the decision drops as to how many people and who's going to be affected by that. But I think really it needs to be considered at the early stages now, when pre-settlement needs to be delved into a lot more at pre-settlement, because a lot of people settlements are I suppose determined with a view that these people may be eligible for NHS CHC because they are eligible at the time. People think they're going to be eligible for life, but NHS CHC is never a lifetime award.
Yeah.
Therefore, the alternative has to be really properly explored.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting point, and it kind of goes back to what we always say in making sure that if you are someone with a complex need and serious injuries, that you have a solicitor that is well experienced and knows their stuff and is able to deal with these sorts of issues during the life of a claim. And it shouldn't, in theory, affect somebody who receives 100% of their compensation, but it does. The wider implications are for those who have deductions from their compensation for contribution negligence or whatever the reasons are, then they're not receiving 100% of their claim, sometimes significantly less than that, and they're reliant upon statutory services to plug the gap. And I suppose that's a real problem, isn't it? I'm just looking at my Q&A box. Joanne Blakely's asked a question: what happens if the client has been provided with a lump sum and then given a periodical payment for care and welfare costs? I think that was asked before we
Oh,
addressed. I think you've answered that, but if we haven't answered it, but I think
they're in double jeopardy actually. So I think the lump sum interest will be taken into consideration, and only £20 of the periodic payment will be disregarded. So potentially they could be in double trouble.
yeah. So what I mean, we're already running out of time, and this is the downfall every single time I do one of these. But I wanted to just touch upon what can people do? The people are obviously impacted by this, and maybe we'll do an episode if there is a decision about what that means for people. But in the meantime, what can people do, Rachel?
Okay, so it's on a fact by fact basis, so case by case basis. Obviously, contact myself, and I will take instructions, look at the case, and advise accordingly. Every case is different, so it's at the moment, as I say, we're looking at judicial reviews, we're looking at complaints at ombudsman, we're looking at asking local authorities to exercise their discretion. As I say, we had to play it by ear. Pick up the phone, have a conversation with me, and we will see which direction is best to go in.
Yeah. Christine Waits has asked, can you name any local authorities involved? That's a hashtag naming and shaming.
I don't feel comfortable to do that.
That's fine. So that's brilliant. I mean, I wish we had more time, Rachel, because I feel like we could talk about this more, but I'm so grateful to you. And just before we logged off, I just wanted to acknowledge that I got a query in advance of the seminar from Mark, who I think is watching at the minute, and we will come back to you, Mark, but it's kind of a separate unrelated query, but we will drop you an email on that. But thank you very, very much, Rachel, as always. I'll make sure that Rachel's details are available. I mean, they're on the Martin Searle website, but I'll make sure that that they're available for anyone that wants to get in touch and has any further queries. Thank you very much again, Rachel, and thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Emma. That was
Take
lovely.
care.
Okay,
Bye.
bye. Bye, everyone.